Let's go on to creating a community of caring. How to foster change through the work of nonprofits. And Patty Robinson and Lois is going to come up here and present for us, and I will bring your presentation up.
Well, hi, everyone. Nice to see you again. I'm Patty Robinson. I know that I've been here a couple times before, and so we're very pleased today to be able to talk to you about kind of a continuation of a couple of the topics that I've presented, and I'm happy to have Lois Bauccio here as well. And we're going to be talking about creating a community of caring, how to foster change through the work of nonprofits. And so specifically, we're going to be kind of tying in what's happening in the community along with what's occurring at College of the Canyons. As you all know from previous presentations, I'm our faculty director of community and civic engagement initiatives at College of the Canyons. And Lois?
Thanks, Patty. Well, I know many of you, Lois Bauccio, and I was for many years the executive director of the Child and Family Center Foundation, and I've been in nonprofit management work for over 30 years. I don't want to say how long because I don't want to date myself, but for a very long time. And it was just great excitement for me to partner up with Patty as we formed with a group of other people the League of Women Voters 2 years ago here in Santa Clarita, and we've been putting that context of women and voting and civic engagement out into some other areas, and this topic tonight is part of that continuation of work, which is kind of a natural thing for women and, of course, men in our community. So thank you, Patty. Patty's going to start.
All right. With regard to today's presentation, we want to discuss the importance of nonprofits and how they contribute to the well-being of the community. Nonprofits play a tremendous role in communities, often taking care of social ills and problems that we find in a local environment. We're also going to review how COC is working with nonprofits to enhance civic and community engagement, particularly among our students. We're going to start first also by just looking at nonprofits and the community. I've got some bullet points here that I'm going to go over very quickly just to kind of give you an idea of how nonprofits are defined. A nonprofit, oftentimes known also as a non-business entity, is dedicated to furthering a particular social cause or issue in a community, oftentimes advocating for a shared view. In economic terms, what happens with a nonprofit is that the surplus that's generated is typically put back into the actual organization itself to combat the problem or the issue that the organization is working with. It is not distributed out as a kind of income to the organization's shareholders, its leaders, or its members. And nonprofits are tax exempt or charitable, meaning they do not pay income. When we look at the role of nonprofits, they seek to ensure the welfare of the community, again, not to gain profit. They want to address certain kinds of social conditions or social issues that the government cannot fully resolve in a community. So oftentimes, again, they're looking at very, very specific kinds of issues that are directly affecting a local community. They render assistance to causes that oftentimes do not generate any kind of profit. So in other words, nonprofit organizations will typically pick up sort of the pieces, if you will, of those issues that maybe the government or other business kinds of entities do not want to deal with. And when we look at the importance of nonprofits, it's important to realize that they look and are very much locally defined with that local environment, and they are very much community driven. They also provide the services and programs to the members to that given community, again, being very, very specifically oriented to that particular community and its population. They help to develop and enrich a local community by enhancing its quality of life, again, by helping and giving back. And they certainly encourage economic growth. And if we look at the number of nonprofits and charities in the Santa Clarita Valley right now, we've got 250 of them, and the number is growing. And I'm just curious, can anyone describe one or two or three and what they might do? I know you mentioned earlier a couple of the folks that you had come into the group here, and they actually were here and were able to answer questions. The first of which I remember Bridge to Home. Bridge to Home being a very important nonprofit organization here in the community that's dealing specifically with the topic of homelessness. Judy. Oh, do you want to?
No, I have to wait for the microphone. Is it coming my way?
Yes.
Yes. I think you should leave it up front.
I know.
Judy is your
Half and
prolific
half.
questioner.
Half and
You
half.
can monitor that one.
Thank you so much. Just yell at me if you need it, okay? The CCAC is a nonprofit. We're a 501c3. Our role in the community is education with what is happening in the Santa Clarita Valley. We're here to inform as much as we possibly can, and we're try to have somebody from each side of a situation come and talk. So we're unbiased. We don't get involved in politics in any way, shape, or form. We're just a purveyor of information without a dime to our names.
And a very good example of what we're talking about here. So Lois is going to talk about the evolution of charity.
Okay, thanks, Patty. Actually, the Moose Lodge itself is probably a 501c4, which is an organization, also a charitable organization, but one which does not receive tax-exempt status for its donors. It's a membership organization and defined as a nonprofit. But the charities that the Moose Lodge supports, and that you named two of them this morning, earlier, Alan, I think those are probably both under a 501c3 banner, perhaps within the Moose Lodge itself. I know as a Zonchan we have that sort of thing. I've been in Zonta many years, and we have that same format. Our club is a 501c4, but we have a foundation which takes care of our charitable aspects. It's complicated, but I would like to just kind of go back to the slides and talk about the whole idea of charity and charitable giving in America. We are talking about American charities today. That's a little bit different than other places in the world. We're a little bit more advanced in that area. But of course, the concept of charity goes way back into the history. It's even biblical. Over the years, it has, of course, grown. When the European settlers came to this continent, they realized that they'd better work together if they wanted to build a new society for themselves. And so in many ways they knew that they needed to help one another. And from the earliest days of our country, people joined together in voluntary organizations just like the Moose Lodge to help one another, and especially their less fortunate neighbors. And these early communities had volunteer, it was very sophisticated at that point. They had volunteer fire departments, they had volunteer militia, they had women's societies, church societies, all of these things to make life more palatable for the young citizens of this. It wasn't really, they weren't citizens yet, but people forming this new nation. After the revolution, the development, our government veered towards charity groups taking care of a sector of our people. And they institutionalized philanthropy in our country. And so in 1831, soon, about 50, 60 years after the formation of our nation, a French sociologist, which many of you may have heard of, Alex de Tocqueville, was sent to America. France was having trouble with its revolution, and its revolutionary processes took place over much of the 19th century, unlike ours, which was actually bloody but quick by comparison. And we also had a civil war in there, but they had a long and hard road figuring out how they were going to deal with changing from a monarchy to a democracy, and what and what the average person had to do with that. And he noted when he was here and wrote his book called Democracy in America, which is still something that is studied by college students not only in the United States but across the globe as a bulwark of how democracy is established and how it worked in the early days. And he points out in that book how important charity and charitable giving, not only the philanthropic side of things, but the service side of things were to the formation of America. So when did these helpful neighbors become volunteers? And when did the idea of charity become nonprofit? Well, in the 20th century, the early part of the 20th century, all governments, state, local, and national, had begun to take on so many roles for these charitable associations that, and these now included libraries and hospitals and schools and police departments, and they realized that much of this needed to be formalized. And so when World War I broke out and the charitable concept of working for neighbors really became a machine in our country, where the women who were left at home rolled bandages and did all kinds of things for the troops, realized that they needed to be organized. And the whole idea of volunteers and volunteerism really is a 20th century development, early in the 20th century. Nonprofit. So let's see. When did the idea of charity become nonprofit? Well, that's easy. When the tax codes were developed, also in the early part of the 20th century, the wise people realized that they needed to have an opportunity for those people who made charitable donations to be recognized for that and not to have to pay income tax. And that's how the whole thing started. Actually, between 1913 and 1918, laws were passed to regulate those taxes, and tax exemptions were formed. Now, these things have gone through evolutionary processes throughout our history, and in fact, just this year, a lot of the charitable giving rules were changed, and they might change back again. It seems to be something we can't really predict. But the 501c3 concept that we were talking about earlier really started in its strength. It was developed in the early 50s, 1954, and it is the same legislation that we work with today, all those many years later. So, next slide, Patty, please. That's okay. So, how do we judge nonprofits for accountability? This is, in this world, something that's quite simple, because we have a lot of different opportunities with online research. GuideStar is one, Charity Watch another, and Charity Now, the Better Business Bureau, Wise Giving Alliance. All of these things can be searched on your computer to find out if you like the way that the dollars are handled, because by law these organizations are required to, even though they don't pay taxes, they must file a 990 tax form every year. And that 990 is a public document which finds its way into these organizations. And you can tell how they're using their money, how much money they actually have. What does nonprofit really mean in that terms? Patty described it very beautifully, but I'll reiterate it just so to strengthen our talk, is that nonprofit doesn't mean that it isn't a business. It very much is a business. It has to be run with a business plan and with the shrewdest business practices in mind. But the dollars that are made are farmed back into the charity itself for charitable purposes. Only staff salaries and things like that can be taken out of those dollars. But it has a board of directors, but they are volunteers. They are not paid. Unlike a board of directors in a business, a for-profit business, who often are paid for that service. This is the vast difference. And so what are the various categories? Well, there are many, and I'm losing my place here. The categories and types. The most common one, as we said, the 501c3. And there's often organizations such as College of the Canyons, which would not be a 501c3. As we talked about, it is a 501c4. It's for the public benefit, but it in its of itself is run by a governmental agency. But in order for them to receive donations, which are very important to its budget, it has to have a nonprofit entity. So it has formed the College of the Canyons Foundation, which has the sole purpose of providing funds for different projects that the college students are in need of. And that's the way most of those kinds of organizations work. Service organizations such as the Moose, Rotary, Zonta, Seroptimist, these are important opportunities for, as Patty defined so well, getting the message, what it is we care about. I mentioned that we've just started 2 years ago a League of Women Voters that came out of a bunch of us women standing around and saying, hey, this is a big town now. We need to have some kind of a league to help people understand how to read their ballot, how to register to vote, and various services educationally to promote voting in Santa Clarita. Again, a charitable endeavor. We are part in that group. We are part right now of a national league. We need to be a member for a couple of years before we get our own status. But we eventually will be a 501c3, and that's very exciting. So, how can you help? Is that the next? Yeah. So how can you help? Well, most of you are already in service. You're here helping your community through this organization. But it's real easy to be involved in charitable endeavors and volunteerism. Do you care about animals and veterans or women's issues, children, education, homelessness? That was one of the things you talked about earlier. Poverty, kids' sports, that's a big thing. Are you interested in Boy Scouting or Girl Scouting, domestic violence, human trafficking? That's my own current one right now that I'm so involved in. Helping your own personal church. Your church has a nonprofit status, so that the services that they provide, both to their parishioners and within the community, is a way to be of service. Maybe you're interested in international issues that are plaguing our world today, and you can get involved in those. Libraries, research, diseases, the list goes on and on. I know I've left many things out that might be dear to your heart. Helping servicemen and their families, all those kinds of things that you see. Of those 250 charities that Patty pointed out, there are others that are not even registered yet that are out there working and doing really great work. So there's always something that can be done if you're spirited in your interest in nonprofit. But how can you help? There might be 100 ways for you to help. You don't always just have to be doing a bake sale or moving chairs around or doing manual labor. You might have a particular skill set, an executive skill that might be very useful for that charity. You might like to be on a board because you might have some executive concepts that could help them develop their business plan. Basically, wherever help is needed, a charity can use your help, and they can find a place for you. So I encourage you to get out there and do some more volunteer work, even though I'm sure you're already doing so much. So, Patty, is that me?
Yes. Yeah. So Lois just mentioned how you can get involved, and obviously there are lots of ways. And what we want to look at now are the nonprofits and how we're connected to them through College of the Canyons, and how we actually are working to get our students involved in looking at some of these issues and problems that are plaguing our community, and getting our students to become very much a part of that community by giving back. One of the things I always start out by saying is that when we talk about education, and particularly a college education, there's always a huge emphasis on what it should do. And a lot of folks think that it's just about really teaching job skills. But what I would argue is that it needs to go way beyond that. And it needs to look at how we actually get back to this idea of creating well-rounded citizens, how we need to foster personal and social responsibility, and how we need to emphasize civic and political engagement. And as many of you who were here the last time I spoke, I had mentioned this, and I said that this is something that we've kind of lost sight of in higher education. Not that it's not being taught, but we tend to sort of relegate it to different disciplines or different classes or different instructors, rather than saying, no, this is what an entire kind of college education should be about. And what this means is that we've got to go back to that idea of what we call the mission of democracy's colleges. Democracy's colleges is the moniker that was actually given to community colleges right after World War II, when Harry Truman put together the Truman Commission. And in 1947, this group of very important businessmen, scholars, and politicians came up with this whole concept of looking at higher education in this country and said, you know, the first and foremost essential charge upon higher education is that all levels is that at all levels and in all of its fields of specialization, it shall be the carrier of democratic values, ideals, and processes. And this was important because we had, as a nation, we had to move forward. We had to show that, you know, we actually had won World War II. We were now a superpower. But if you looked at the number of people throughout the country who actually had college educations, it was very small. And so now, if we were going to maintain that kind of power as a nation and be able to become a global power, we had to make sure that the masses were being educated, and the community college was to play an important role because it allowed for open access and therefore became, quote, democracy's colleges. We at College of the Canyons are emphasizing now civic engagement. We have a civic and community engagement initiative that we're pushing forward on our campus, really going back to that idea of democracy's colleges. How do we get our students involved? How do we get our campus involved? How do we create a campus culture that really thinks about civic and community engagement? And this is the term or the definition that we are using that comes from the work of Thomas Ehrlich, who is well cited throughout universities and colleges throughout the country with regard to civic engagement. And as you can see, it's not just based on political engagement. We're talking about community engagement. We're about giving back to our communities through the kind of public work that we do. And when we look at democracy's colleges and who we're educating, you can see that this is an audience that is incredibly ripe to learn about the civic engagement, nonprofits, and how to give back. While these numbers are a little bit different today, these are based on 2014 figures, you certainly get an idea of who community colleges consist of or comprise the population of. We have more women than men. We see that about half of the students that are enrolled at community colleges nationwide are Caucasian. The numbers of Hispanic students are certainly growing, and certainly in California, those numbers are really growing. We also see an increase with African American students. We see also today that many of our students who are in the community college are first-gen students, and certainly the one thing to understand is that between 45–46% of all undergraduates in this country are at a community college, meaning that the majority of those students who transfer to four-year universities have started out at a community college. Therefore, we're going back to the idea of democracy's colleges and how it's so important to get our students involved in giving back, working with those nonprofits. And one of the things that we're doing at College of the Canyons is that we're working through our community-based learning program, which is really getting our students connected to nonprofits out in the community, where they're combining the work of their classes, their disciplines, and they actually are working with many of our nonprofits like Bridge to Home, the Domestic Violence Center, and I could go on. And part of what they're trying to do is not only to assist these nonprofits, but we're also trying to educate our students to understand these social problems or these issues that are confronting our local community. But what we're doing also at College of the Canyons right now is trying to move this idea of community-based learning from an old model that actually emphasized nothing more than volunteering for just hours to really now getting students to think in terms of the impact that they can make. We're trying to turn their service into action, how they can actually now serve these local nonprofits, but also help them in trying to create change through social action. We're emphasizing project-based learning, where students are actually looking at problems and trying to come up with solutions, or a nonprofit providing a problem to our college and saying, what can your students do to try and create a solution? And this is a very different way of looking at how to work with nonprofits than in the old model, where literally we would have students go out to an agency site and say, here I am, how can you use me? So again, we want this to be transformative, not only for the student, but also for the agency. We're emphasizing design thinking, action research, and we're taking on an asset-based kind of approach. Rather than going out into a community and looking at a group, let's say if I am working with a homeless, rather than taking a deficit kind of approach or a deficit model and saying, oh, I need to fix you, we're trying to get students to understand, to look at this group and say, what do you have to give? How can you be part of the solution? We want to hear from you. We are looking to make our students agents of change, and certainly this is something that we're hoping can start from the beginning until the end of their careers at College of the Canyons. This idea of the active citizen continuum, you know, you start out on the one side where maybe you have a little bit of interest in what's going on, but maybe not really participating, to becoming an active citizen. And this is very, very important, because this kind of work of getting our students out in the community, working with nonprofits, they are becoming the citizens and giving back in their communities. Most of our students are going to continue to live in this community, and we need to get them actively engaged in that community early on. Here are some of the things that our students are actually working on and what they're interested in, and you can see the correlation with many of our nonprofits. So everything from income inequality to sex trafficking, as Lois mentioned a few minutes ago, to human rights, to the environment, to food purity, water insecurity. The list goes on, and these are the actual interests that our students have said that they want to work with, and that they want to try and find solutions for. And I mentioned Generation Z the last time I was here. Generation Z is the new group. This is the young group now coming into college campuses. These guys are on fire. They want to do something. They want to give back. They're concerned about being leaders. They're not passive. They're not sitting on the curb and saying, well, no, it's not my problem. You take care of it. They're saying, no, it is my problem, and I want to try and fix it. So we have the opportunity with this new generation coming into college campuses to really get them excited about working with nonprofits, and again, looking at the kinds of solutions that they can try and come up with regard to these social issues that our communities are facing. I have 3 slides here, and I'm just going to go through them quickly. Here's just a list of the community partners that we're working with at College of the Canyons. These are nonprofit organizations that we actually have partnered with. You can see everything from the American Red Cross to Blue Star Ranch to Bridge to Home, the Boys and Girls Club, Carousel Ranch. We partnered with several of our school districts, the Circle of Hope, Family Promise, Gentle Barn, Homes for Families, Hands on Santa Clarita, Heal the Bay, Help the Children, all the way to NAMI, the Natural History Museum, ProCare Hospice, Placerita Nature Center. We have a really great partnership going on right now with Providence Holy Cross and their tattoo removal clinic, and also certainly Samuel Dixon Health Centers. These are the kinds of agencies, the organizations, the nonprofits that we are working with. And some more, I forgot. You can see Single Mothers Outreach, Special Olympics, Sunrise Senior Living. When students partner with these agencies, they not only get a sense of what it's like to work in a nonprofit and maybe consider career options they've never thought of before, but they actually are now giving back, and they're helping our community. And this is our tagline, invest yourself, inspire others. We really do feel that if we can get our students invested in themselves, that they will, in fact, give to others. Any questions? Judy.
Of course. That was outstanding. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Where does a Grammy get her COC grandson? Where do I point him? Go here, go talk to that person. Gee, go to see Dr. Robinson?
It would be me.
Okay, so he would just drop in, or he would?
Yeah, he can call me, he can email me, and I can set up an appointment with him.
Okay,
Yeah, happy to help.
thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much.